So I just saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the new Quentin Tarantino movie, and I'm going to talk about it because I have hot takes. So if you haven't heard about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's the latest movie from Quentin Tarantino. And I guess I'll start by saying that Quentin Tarantino is one of my favorite directors, probably like a lot of white people who were assigned male at birth and who came up liking movies in the early 2000s. I really, really like Kill Bill and Inglourious Bastards. They're probably two of my favorite movies. And I'm kind of afraid to re-examine that. It's sort of one of those things where those movies are really important to me in a general sense. Kill Bill more so, but I don't want to rewatch them because I'm afraid that I will actually find them to be utterly disgusting in every possible way. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood doesn't exactly make me feel a lot better about the prospect of forgiving Quentin Tarantino for his film crimes. Basically, the plot of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is that you got an actor, Leo DiCaprio, who's washed up. He played a bunch of like Western characters, and now he's being constantly emasculated in his roles as the villain. And he feels like his career is just tumbling away. Meanwhile, his buddy Cliff is going out and driving around Hollywood, encountering this random hippie girl, drives her out to where she needs to go, which turns out to be this old film lot place that's now been taken over by a hippie commune that turns out to be the Manson family. Rick Dalton does a really good job in his scene as the villain, and then they go. It's hard to keep straight what happens in this movie because basically nothing happens in this movie. This movie is just a lot of non-existent plot followed eventually by extremely brutal and unexpected and unnecessary violence. In case you don't know, in August of 1969, the Manson family drove up to where Roman Polanski lived. He was out of the country prepping another movie, and they murdered Sharon Tate and three of her friends. Sharon Tate, who is, of course, the wife of Roman Polanski, who is a criminal. Well, this movie imagines an alternate history where Rick Dalton and Cliff live next to Roman Polanski. The Manson family killers decide to instead kill Rick Dalton because Rick Dalton is the one who made the violence in films that made them violent. And so they break in and Cliff violently, really just upsettingly murders them and saves Sharon Tate. And that's the end of the movie. I feel compelled to compare this film to Inglourious Bastards, which is another Tarantino movie. By the end of the film, the entire Nazi leadership has been burned alive and shot and blown up and just generally annihilated. Tarantino retcons World War II to end there, basically. The point of the film that I read in Inglourious Bastards is that film, as a medium, is borderline infinitely powerful, I guess I should say, if I want to be grammatically correct. In the hands of the right people, film can terrorize the perpetrators of abuse. And in the wrong hands, it can perpetrate abuse. Because on the one hand, you have the creation of extremely extravagant Nazi propaganda, which people celebrate adoringly. And then you have the creation of revolutionary film that basically is a Jewish woman taking revenge for the murder of her family and also for everybody that the Nazis have done a Nazi on. And the whole movie is basically just giving us an opportunity to feel some smug superiority at the idea of having just murdered the shit out of a bunch of fucking racist fascists. And the violence perpetrated to the Nazis in that film is gratuitous and over the top, and it's forgivable because it's fucking Nazis. It's the same reason why you cheer on BJ Blazkowicz in the new Wolfenstein games, because there's a lot of things you can do with a hatchet.
And a Nazi.
Oops, sorry about you. Whoa! Nazis are bad. I think that's an okay is that a problematic take that Nazis are? I think we can all agree that Nazis are bad, right? Right? But here you have Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which does a similar thing of retconning history. This time it's to save Sharon Tate. So, all right, you have the infinite power of film, and you as a creator have decided to rewrite history, which means you can do literally anything. And what you decide to do is save Sharon Tate, the wife of Roman Polanski, who you, as Quentin Tarantino, have defended. And yeah, I know he apologized, but that doesn't really change what I'm saying here. It's notable that this film comes out in 2019, which is after the hashtag #MeToo movement was co-opted by rich white women. This comes after Weinstein was fucking ousted, but gets like paid retirement for the rest of his life and will never face any actual consequences for his many, many, many heinous, awful crimes. So the question I want to ask is, why this particular revision of history? Well, first let's ask, what is this movie's opinion of women? And the answer seems to be that they are not great. For the most part, women are shown to be shrewish, needy, opportunistic, and generally poorly tempered and annoying and shallow and vapid, and a lot of other adjectives. You've got Cliff's wife, who is shown in one scene to be a haranguing, abusive person whom Cliff just kills, presumably. You've got Rick Dalton's wife, who shows up for a hot minute at the end of the movie, and all that we ever really see of her is that she's like trying to sleep a lot and she gets mad and speaks in Italian. We see Zoe Bell show up and she yells at Cliff for throwing Bruce Lee into her car. There's the entire hippie commune who's shown to be like sexually overactive, underage, naive, idiotic, and that's basically all the women that we see, besides like a makeup artist and a costume artist who are showed to be toadies of this director. The notable women that we see are, of course, Sharon Tate and this child actress, or as she would say, actor. She's made to seem intelligent and charming, but also like naive. She kind of comforts Rick Dalton, who cries in front of her when he's describing the details of this cowboy book that he's reading that turn out to be surprisingly close to the details of his own life. Later on, he does a scene with her. Afterwards, she brings up to him, "That was the best acting I've ever seen," which seems to imply that the moral of method acting is like pointless because Rick Dalton just does his fucking job and he's able to act a storm, and that's all you need to do. Who needs a method actor? And then there's Sharon Tate, who goes to the theater to see her own movie and sits in the audience and seems to feel genuine joy at the fact that she's making people laugh. And I thought that was charming before I knew who she was, because going into this, I actually didn't know about Sharon Tate. You know, when you realize, oh wait, she's the future, in real life, she's a victim of Manson family murders, that kind of recontextualizes the angelic nature of her portrayal. Because she seems to be one of the only, like, good people in the movie. So the film averts her murder and she lives. So what does her angelic portrayal say about that? Well, Roman Polanski is notable as one of the only Hollywood sex pests that people have known for a very long time is just an absolute piece of garbage and is unambiguously canceled. Rick Dalton is like, Roman fucking Polanski's, he made Rosemary's fucking Baby. I'm just one pool party away from being a leading man in one of his movies. It seems to me that Sharon Tate is an angelic figure primarily because she has the ability to save Roman Polanski from himself. The result therein would be that he would be an unproblematic favorite, that Quentin Tarantino could guiltlessly love his movies without having to go through this conversation every time of like, yeah, I mean, he's a piece of shit, but his movies are great. But before we get to that, we got to talk about Rick Astley. No, Rick Dalton, who is, he's constantly emasculated. He cries a lot. And his vulnerability and him crying seems to be played for a joke. The audience that I saw it with certainly laughed. His portrayal, to me, basically feels childlike. And so it's notable that his other on-screen peer that he seems to get along with is a child actress. And then alongside that, there is Sharon Tate, who seems to show a kind of childlike joy in life. And we have to contrast that with the fucking hippies. We see them dumpster diving and pulling bread out of a dumpster. We see them hitchhiking a lot. They're always wearing skimpy clothes and they're very thin. They are childlike in their own way, but their way is that they are naive and foolish and dumb. They're not people. They're I don't know. They seem like cultists. There is an interesting comparison in that the way that we see the Manson Ranch is sort of mirrored in the way that we see Western Town in this production studio, and the ways that you could say that actors are members of a cult or whatever. So Cliff is driving one of these girls to the ranch, and she's sitting in the car with him, and she's like, "Hey, do you want me to suck your dick while you drive?" And he asks, "How old are you?" And they have this whole exchange about her being of age, and he says, "I'm not gonna go to jail for poontang," his words, not mine. And she's disappointed that she doesn't get to be a sex for him. And she lays her head on his lap, and she says, "Obviously, I'm not too young to have sex with you, but you're too old to have sex with me." This movie's politics are weird because in the next scene, she's like, "Come with me. I want you to meet my friend Charles Manson." He meets everybody in the sex cult. The attitude of this place turns against him. He then gets his tire popped by one of the people. So what Cliff does is Cliff beats the shit out of the guy pretty brutally, just punches him several times directly in the face, and then makes him change his tire and drives off. So I guess let's get into Cliff. We see a scene with him on a boat with his wife where she's nagging him and he's got a harpoon gun in his hand, and it said, yeah, he killed his wife and got away with it. We see a scene of him as a stuntman getting lectured by Bruce Lee, and he proceeds to be a real man and beat the shit out of Bruce Lee, throw him into a car. And then he smokes an acid cigarette just in time for the Manson family killers to come to his house where he's staying the night with Rick Dalton. I think it's important to sort of recount exactly what he does. Hey, future Sarah here, just letting you know that I'm about to recount some really upsetting things. Skip to this time code if you don't want to watch it. Otherwise, please enjoy the footage of these precious, wonderful animals. He sicks his dog on the guy with the gun, and we get a lot of really loving shots of the dog just ripping the dude apart. And then he throws a tin can full of dog food at one girl, and it breaks her nose really bad, and she falls to the ground and she starts screaming, and we get a lot of loving close-ups of her face sort of caved in. He gets tackled by this other lady and gets stabbed in the leg. It doesn't faze him. He sort of touches it and laughs, and then he grabs her and he smashes her face against the mantelpiece, and then he moves a little bit to the left and he smashes her face against the mantelpiece, and then he proceeds to smash her face very hard, very violently against every fucking surface in the goddamn living room. Then Cliff passes out, and the lady grabs the gun and runs out screaming into the pool area where Rick Dalton is listening to music, and Rick Dalton goes into his little pool shed and comes out with a flamethrower and burns this woman alive, and we get to watch her scream and melt and be on fire for a really long time until she sinks, and we just see it. We just see it. And the people in my fucking theater were laughing the whole time. And I had to look away for whole chunks of it because it was a bad time. And I say again, I like Tarantino generally, Kill Bill and Inglourious Bastards, arguably his two most violent movies. I really enjoy them. The difference there is that the violence that happens in Kill Bill is couched in the trappings of like 70s exploitation films from Japan. It's comical, it's anime, it's weird, it's so over the top as to lose its like actual human effect. Whereas the violence that happens in Inglourious Basterds similarly is couched in this over the top 1970s aesthetic where we're clearly in a 70s exploitation film about war, and all the violence, generally speaking, is happening against Nazis. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, on the other hand, is a generally grounded film to take place in our reality, and while the title implies a level of fantasy, there's really nothing fantastical that happens in it until the very end. As such, the violence in Once Upon a Time hits a lot harder because it's happening, supposedly, in the real world. Here in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the violence is happening against 3 cultists. Now, I'm not going to shed any tears for the Manson family, and I'm not defending people who murder people in a general sense. What I will say is that members of cults, generally speaking, are people who are disadvantaged, and fucking creeps like Charles Manson take advantage of those people, brainwash them, and force them to do really bad things. And yes, Charlie Manson was a Nazi. There is still a substantial difference between a racist cult and a state body whose racist ideology is enforced through government action. The idea that they deserve the same level of cinematic violence as Nazis is bad enough on its own to me. But there's also the fact that, in Inglourious Basterds, Hitler dies. The Nazi regime is just wiped out in that movie. Whereas here, Charlie Manson, we never even see his ass. Actually, we do see him, but I forgot about that scene and it doesn't really matter because he's barely a presence in the movie. Presumably, he just goes on to recruit more cultists and try his hand at murder again. When the Manson acolytes say that we should kill the people who made the violence that made us violent, the lines are delivered without gravitas. There doesn't seem to be any ideological purity in what they're saying. It sounds like they're just looking for an excuse to spill blood. This is relevant to note because, of course, Tarantino's films have long been the subject of criticism for their violence, and the demographics of these hippies are the same demographics that you would see among young people on Twitter throwing a fuss about the Me Too movement. Maybe that sounds conspiratorial, but I just think that it's interesting that this film frames people in this position as having no justified basis for criticism. That they don't even really believe what they're saying, they're just saying it because they want something to rip apart. This becomes doubly relevant when we remember the ruthlessly over-the-top violence that is visited upon them in the next scene. When we take it as granted that the sequence is played as a joke, we can't help but come to the conclusion that this violence is mocking these people for their stance that depictions of violence have a tangible effect on the real world. Which, I don't know, seems to maybe contradict the points that were made in Inglourious Basterds. I don't know. The problem seems to be that people who watch movies have ideas about how things should be run. Like, they're the ones who are wrong and who are foolish and childish. And they're the ones who need to be punished. Ultimately, I think this movie just feels mean-spirited. There is a strain of argument for some of Quentin Tarantino's movies that is resoundingly feminist. This feels like a movie that he made after the Me Too movement and decided that he was really mad at the way that all the children, i.e. everybody who watches movies and all of the women involved in movies, were ruining his hobby and his career and taking all of the fun out of it and like making it about something that it's not. And it's just weird that he chooses the original sin to be the murder of Sharon Tate. And the last thing I'll say is like, Tarantino's allowed to make whatever movies he wants to make. His politics don't have to align with mine. I just think that his politics are garbage, that the politics of this movie are dog shit. You, dear viewer, are not a criminal for having liked this movie. And if you have an alternate interpretation, I welcome it. Because unlike what Tarantino thinks, I'm not in fact a child. I think that there's room in this world for many interpretations. And I also think that movies have an impact, which is evident by the fact that I felt sick to my stomach after the end of this movie. I don't fucking know, man. Go watch Hail Caesar. Go watch literally anything else. Just, Tarantino, could you stop making movies, please? All we want is to like people's movies, and they just keep outing themselves. Okay, bye. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. I'm sorry it's been so long since my last one. I didn't intend to make this one, but I had a lot of feelings about this movie, obviously, as evident by the runtime of this film, which is down there. I have another video that I'm working on that was supposed to be the next one, but I guess I'm doing this one instead, so hooray! For those of you who don't know, I do live streams over at twitch.tv/Sarah Zedig. That's me. Hello. I also host a podcast, the Trans Questioning Podcast, a podcast about what it means to be transgender, and I often have guests on. I'm also a co-host of the podcast Fish in the Percolator, a Twin Peaks rewatch podcast that is hosted by Eric and Lily, who are Moth Cub and Curio, and they're fun and good, and it's a good podcast. You should find it on all the places where the places that you can get podcasts are. So I am actually doing things that aren't just this channel. And I guess I should do a video that's like me promoting those things specifically, so you don't have to sit through like 55 minutes of whatever the fuck this is to get to me talking about that stuff. Anyway, special thanks go to these people: Nick Hansen, Violet Vizcara, Catherine Krall, Zofia Martel, Alex Laporte, Daniel Eliasson, Cocronell, Logan McQuiston, Austin McCauley, Get Dunked On, Going Public, Faye, Mountain Snow, Mila Kwan, Agent JR, J Mac D, Hello Burp, Hello DCK Burp, Go DC Dugley, Justin Cruck, Kill All Landlords, Amy Mims, Mix B, Kristen H, Valerian, Not Sam, Bianca Gonzalez, Hashabi Valley, Cersei, Z, Iris Fox, Momo Balky, Robert Cutts, Gary Marshall, Scott Olson, Alan Lewis, Set, Cayenne Shepherd, Jeffrey Gralloway, Marcus Kitzinger Swishcube, Anarcho Duck, Jennifer Palmer, and Richard Daly. Those were my $10 a month patrons. If you like what I do and you want to support me in making more, why not go to patreon.com/LTAS and give us as little as $1 a month, where you get access to a 30-minute long exclusive video essay and other stuff. There's also a 4-hour-long commentary on my transitioning video. $5 a month patrons get access to my notes and scripts and various other unused materials. And then $10 a month patrons get access to their names read aloud in the credits, which makes them immortal for all time. In this video where I talk about Quentin, the movie maker man, he sure likes his feet, doesn't he? Yeah, he does. That's a man who likes a foot. That one. Anyway, this has been a video about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Thanks for watching, I guess. And I'll see you again in the next one, which will hopefully have a script and therefore be intelligible. Thank you again. Oh, I'm also on Twitter at HMSNoFun. Bye. I'm doing stuff. You gotta leave me alone. Just lay down, quit licking yourself. You're making too much noise.